Are there any difficulties in its application? Lee, I want to go and start with this. I'll just move to you.
As I mentioned, the differentiation between right and wrong for a Muslim or Islamic religion comes from the holy book called the Quran. The Quran actually gives out a description of what is right from what is wrong as far as morality is concerned. It is very much similar to the Bible. Also, not only is it dependent upon the holy book, but also God has instilled a program the human being with a subconscious mind where his own conscience would be able to accept or reject that what is allowed or disallowed. So the divine command theory, which says that if God commands something, it must be good. It's partially correct and partially incomplete. I wouldn't say incorrect, but it is incomplete in the sense that the humans themselves also have a mind and a conscience of their own, which enable them to make decisions and to differentiate between right and wrong on their own. Is it a complete theory? Does it have flaws? Of course it does. It's incomplete. It gets more difficult when we get into the different religions of the world, and especially when we talk about the consciousness of the person. Every person has different standards, so it becomes even more difficult because for one person what may be right, for another person may be wrong.
Okay, do you find the divine command to be persuasive? I find a conclusive thought that convinces me that the divine theory is entirely persuasive. The universe itself necessitates the existence of a grand designer. This is an excellent example of the way in which created order reveals the existence of God. The divine command theory supports Christ's claim that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And we believe that if we follow him, that he leads to a proper and appropriate response benevolently towards society so that we can become society builders and blessers of the human race. The United States of America is a great nation. Alexis de Tocqueville wrote, he came from France to find out why our nation is the nation everybody wants to come to. Why is this country an example country to the whole world? And he wrote, there is no country in the whole world in which the Christian religion retains a greater influence over the souls of men than in America. And there can be no greater proof of its utility and its conformity to human nature, and that its influence is most powerfully felt over the most enlightened and free nation on the face of the earth. Unfortunately, I have to admit that America has, and the rest of the Western culture, has eradicated large chunks of the values from the public square. I contend to you today that the divine command theory is the most persuasive of all for mankind. When man obeys God's commands, his life prospers, and he positively becomes an effective part of society. When man's actions are led by human reasoning and man-made ideals of what is right, and his idea of success, then you have a risk of distortions of truth, and we find man continuing that surge for happiness and satisfaction. Why should we question whether man can live without God? We should instead question, would man want to live without God? The history of nations should persuade mankind to believe in the consistency and the power behind the divine command theory. Nations have risen and fallen from the beginning of time, and we find the stability of a God that is yesterday, the same yesterday, today, and forever. Stability.
For the divine command theory to be persuasive, one would first have to provide rational reasons to believe that such a God that issued moral commands existed in the first place. They would then need to provide reasons as to how we know what it is such a being is actually commanded. Therefore, the divine command theory is not persuasive to humanists. Nor is it a viable theory that one can use to resolve ethical problems in the real world, unless we are speaking only of the ethical problems that arise between those members of the same, most resolve ethical issues by resorting to their shared beliefs. But for the rest of the world, or between members of different belief systems, the divine command theory is practically useless. Certainly for humanists it is. Instead, humanists say that the good is good in its own right. Again, the Humanist Manifesto 3 states that ethical values are derived from human need and interests, and they're tested by experience. Humanist Manifesto 2000 says, using reason and cognition will better enable us to appraise our values in the light of evidence by their consequences. Humanists believe that it's the consequences on overall human happiness and well-being that determine whether or not a value, a virtue, or an ethic is good. In our view, no supernatural sanction or command is needed to justify the wisdom of being good.
So we think there's some difficulties in the task force.
Yes, because of the differing belief system.
All right, next question, please.
No, wait. Oh, you got a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
As a free thinker, I don't find the divine command theory to be neither persuasive nor even effective means of developing or implementing a moral or ethical code of behavior. I liken the divine command theory to big man morality. Big man morality, the biggest man, or to be politically correct, the biggest person or woman in the room would make all the rules. As such, it boils down at that point in time to my takes right, or do it because I'm the biggest and I say so. As in parenting, that is neither persuasive nor effective. And as such, as a free thinker, I find such authoritarianism philosophy to be insufficient to develop a code of how I should conduct myself on a daily basis in my interactions with fellow human beings or even animals. I find that the divine command theory also has another issue. There are multiple religions that depend on the divine command theory, and as Daniel stated, they are in conflict with each other, and they contradict each other on a number of fundamental items. And when it comes to that point, how does one choose between the divine command theories that are competing for our attention and for our to persuade us on how to act? That's an extreme difficulty because throughout the centuries of human existence, there's been one religion after another that purports to build a foundation for an ethical moral system on the God commanding man what they should do. Another difficulty I find with the divine command theory is often taken on a literal and fundamental basis. They are rigid and unchanging. Frequently, they're unable to adapt to the acquisition of new information. Unlike one that's based on reason, science, logic, they find themselves to be outdated and unrefined, and our sense of morality must incorporate new information, new things that we've learned about how humans are and how humans react. Therefore, I find that very unpersuasive.
To the next question. And I'll have you start. Can one lead a morally virtuous life without believing in God? If so, how? And the Christian who goes to start this list.
Okay, is this one, the second chapter?